I'm Dr. Joe Pace, Managing Partner of the Pacific Institute's Higher Education Initiative. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today because I'm a similar other. I'm just like you. I've spent half my life in colleges and schools. My background has been college president, sat on several accrediting commissions and licensing boards. And the reason I tell you that story is a few years ago, I decided to work on my doctoral degree and became a psychologist. And when I had to do my dissertation, I figured I want to do something that I can use in my own college that I was president of at the time. So we decided to study and look at the behavioral trait known as persistence. Why some people give up, why some people persist. Is it something that can be learned? Is it something that you just are born with? Is it in the genes and the DNA? Well, the good news is that it's something we found that can be learned. So as I was trying to do research on persistence, a student came to me one night and said, you know, Dr. Pace, well, I wasn't Dr. Pace yet, but they said, Mr. Pace, what you're talking about here, I've been through, and I work for AT&T, and we took a course called Investment in Excellence with a gentleman named Lou Tice. And, you know, I live in South Florida, and the Pacific Institute's in Seattle, so it's about as far as you can get. And what happened was I got a grant to come out here and go through the Pacific Institute's training to see what it was all about and to see if I could apply it to my research on persistence. Well, when I came out, I met Lou Tice, I sat through the training, I was jumping out of my seat because I could see that what this organization had is exactly what we needed to put into colleges and schools to help students persist. Well, the Pacific Institute's been around for several years, 35, 36 years, and basically what they've been doing is they take the best research in the world in mainly three areas. It's called cognitive psychology. Cognitive, by the way, just means that it makes sense, that it's logical, 2 and 2 are 4, 4 and 4 are 8, and it appears in the field of psychology when the brain can rationalize something, we can self-correct. Well, then it's also involved in what we call cognitive social psychology, how people interact, how behavior is influenced by other people and society and so forth. And the third one is called cognitive organizational psychology, on how organizations operate. So what I did was I took that information along with my research and we merged it together. So I became a partner with Lou Tice, and we've been offering the program for about 15 years now. Well, the interesting thing about the Pacific Institute is they're worldwide, global, work with entire countries like Guatemala, Northern Ireland, South Africa. Been there for years with their curriculum. And where does this curriculum come from? Well, we're kind of translators. We take this fabulous information that researchers spend most of their lives with their empirical studies and their control groups, and they have to scientifically prove things. And then, frankly, it just kind of sits there. Nobody really uses it that much. So the Pacific Institute takes that material, translates it, makes it user-friendly with the validation of the researchers. And then what we do is we kind of niche it. So we're involved in most Fortune 500 companies. We work in prisons. We work with collegiate athletics and professional athletics, Olympic athletes. And so I said, we need to do something in higher education, in colleges and schools. So we developed this program, which is a two-track system. One is we come in and we train all the faculty and staff, and then we train faculty to also train students. So there's a faculty staff program and a student program. I call it the two-track system. When it's working together, guess what happens? Students persist and stay in school. Because it's funny that the reasons most students drop have nothing to do with aptitude or how smart they are. But it has everything to do with what you might refer to as attitude or baggage, problems the students bring with them. I had an administrator tell me that his students sometimes, he has this vision that He looks out in the back parking lot and he sees all these Mayflower vans. You ever seen Mayflower moving vans? And that these students have all this baggage. They leave it in the truck, come to school, then get in the moving van and go home. And it's sort of never ending. So what we decided to do was, let's put a program together that really fits for students. So I got to thinking, how can I explain this? And around that time, a book came out that was one of the best sellers. It was called Emotional Intelligence. And emotional intelligence, they referred to as EQ. IQ versus EQ. Sounded cute, so they used it. Frankly, though, you really can't measure emotions that much like you can measure an IQ. So what was interesting was that in the materials on IQ and EQ, it said that success in life is only about 20% IQ. And about 80% what they called emotional intelligence. And I'm not even sure I like that label. You know, words trigger pictures that give you feelings or emotions. So I got to thinking, you know what this is? I think this is street smarts. I think this is common sense. I think this is persistence, eye of the tiger, chutzpah. There are all these names. We call this stuff that we can't really grab onto. And then the idea hit me, like, where do you learn this stuff? Do you get it in the family? Where do you, are you born with it? Well, as I did further research, I came up with a chart here, a graphic I want to show you. It says quality education. How many hours or credits do you have in? And on the left side, it says traditional education. And under it, it says math, history, science, language, geography, computer training, vocational, job skills. On this side, it says non-traditional education. Dependability, honesty, good attitude, accountability, being a team player, cultural diversity, being professional, being able to handle change. And what I found was schools teach everything on the left and employers hire for everything on the right. Make sense? Well, how can that be? Well, most people think you should have this non-traditional education just naturally, like you should have been zapped. But the majority of us today, we're not zapped. In fact, it is said that less than 3% of the population really knows this information and applies it to everyday life. For example, the big three seem to be dependability, honesty, and good attitude. And by far, number one seems to be dependability. Most of your schools help to place students. Well, if you're in career placement or job placement, the very first question that these employers ask when they call is, can you send me somebody that'll show up every day? Will you send me somebody that's dependable? Okay? The second thing they'll ask for is somebody I can trust, somebody that's honest. And the third one is, geez, will you send me somebody that's not a whiner, you know, that has a little bubbly attitude or personality and isn't negative. You ever been around negative people or whiners? They just drain you, okay? So dependability seems to be number one. Now, the reason for that is, have you ever, those of you in your departments and so forth, if a person was absent, doesn't it throw the rhythm of the entire department and the entire organization out of whack? Absolutely. So I got to thinking one day, how in the heck do you teach this stuff? How do you teach dependability, honesty, good attitude? Well, I can honestly say that we developed a program, Thought Patterns for a Successful Career, that embedded in it is the actual concept training in these areas. Now, here's what's interesting. When you look at dependability, honesty, and good attitude, the question always comes up is, can you teach someone a good attitude? Well, what we've learned is this, that with some of the researchers I talked to and that I've worked with, I said, well, you know, you can teach all this. However, if you don't practice the 3 M's, it's not going to work. So I said, okay, you got me. What are the 3 M's? And they said, well, first of all, let me write the 3 M's here. The first M stands for model. That if you are not modeling this same type of information or the same types of concepts, in your colleges and schools, they're not going to pick it up. They're not going to get it. You have to model it. Well, I have school personnel that tell me, I don't want to be a model. You know, I just want to teach my class and go home. I just want to do my financial aid and go home. I just want to place students and go home. I don't want to be a model. Well, I'm sorry, but you're a model by default. It's the same with children. You can tell children things over and over, but what are they going to listen to? What you model. Well, the second M stands for mentor. That along with modeling to them, you have to mentor them. Meaning what? Tell them things, work with them. In fact, some research we have says that human beings need to hear things at least 8 times. Some of us 16. Some of us 32. Some of us 100. You know how we are, right? Just can't get it through your head. Well, we found that the reason that happens is that the teacher appears when the student's ready, not when you are, okay? The same thing is the mentor appears when the student's ready. So we're all mentors, by the way, and we're all students. So what we've learned is repetition is the mother of learning. We have to repeat it 8 times, 16 times, 32 times, and come from different angles and give examples and tell stories until they got it, okay? Now, the third M stands for monitor. Monitor means that you have to follow up, that you have to hold the person accountable, that you can't let them off the hook. So you've got to model, mentor, and monitor these traits day to day for your children to get them or to sink in, to become habit knit, as well as your students. So modeling, think about the traits that you want your students to have for employability. I'm going to talk to you about mentoring them. Things like how to find the teachable moments, how to repeat things without making them sound redundant or boring. I'm going to talk to you about monitoring, following up, holding them accountable. How many of you are parents? Okay. Now, children, if you let them off the hook after you tell them something, it all falls apart. So you have to hold people, students, your children, your students, everybody accountable and follow up and monitor. Now, what's interesting is most people, we found, most humans, that 85% of who we are, our thought patterns, and our behavior and personality was established by the time we were 3 years old and solidified by 5. Any of you have kids that age? To me, I have 4 grandkids. I think they've got 100% by 3. It's amazing. Now, what will happen is if we don't self-examine or we don't revisit these traits, we're going to be the same when we're 95. So most of our habits, attitudes, beliefs, expectations were formed in those early ages of 3 to 5. Now, I can't remember being 3 to 5. Any of you remember being that age? Okay. So a lot of good stuff is in the brain, but there's probably a lot of garbage in there too, right? So once we begin to recognize all this, and we are modeling, mentoring, and monitoring, what begins to happen is change takes place. Now, when you're doing all this, what happens is it affects student retention or dropout prevention. Because there's a simple formula: the more attention, the more retention. Attention equals retention. The more attention you pay to the students over any period of time, the greater the retention. The less attention you pay to them, the worse the retention or the greater the attrition. So for example, if you're going through an accreditation self-study or an accreditation visit, or you're putting a new MIS program in, a new computer program, or you're expanding your building, you will notice drops of students during that period because the attention is now going to the computer system, to the self-study, to the accreditation, and not to the students. Because as they feel your caring, as they sense your modeling, mentoring, and monitoring, they are being shaped for these types of concepts and qualities.